Night settles over the Meuse Valley like a heavy woolen blanket, dimming the last embers of winter light. Frost clings to bare branches. The river moves slowly beneath its own breath of mist, a silver thread winding through dark woods and low hills. On those heights, Douaumont, Vaux, Froid-de-Terre, the old forts sleep under layers of earth and concrete, their embrasures shuttered, their corridors cold and echoing. Built after a different war and a different humiliation, they ring Verdun as if encircling a quiet heartbeat. Some heavy guns have been removed over the years, carted away to feed other fronts. What remains feels skeletal, a defensive necklace dulled by time, still heavy, still there. In the towns and farms behind the hills, windows glow and fade as oil lamps are snuffed. Church bells mark the hour, and then the silence returns, dense, unbroken, almost tender. A few kilometers away, the silence breaks in small, cautious sounds. A boot scuff against frozen plank, a metal canteen settling, a whispered warning that hangs in the cold. The front line is close, but tonight it feels far, as though the woods themselves are wary of speaking. Snow gathers on sandbags, wire stays rigid, needle sharp. Across the lines, the preparations are measured and immense. Trains have come in the dark for weeks, exhaling steam into moonless air. Flat cars bring crates that clink with metal and grease. Horses stamp and snort, turned ghost-like by their own breath. Roadways have been widened, causeways strengthened, timber laid down across the mud like careful stitches. In the forest clearings, bois de cour, herbebois, haumont, the ground has been systematically trimmed, lanes cut through the trees, range stakes hammered flush with the snow. Lines are drawn where no pen has moved. Hundreds upon hundreds of guns have been hauled into masked positions. Field pieces crouching behind brush screens, heavy howitzers bedded into frozen clay, monstrous siege mortars sunk deep like anchors. Their barrels tilt at the dim sky, patient, unspeaking, exact. Far behind them, a plan was written with a surgeon's pen. It speaks of fixation and attrition, of drawing an opponent into a place that cannot be abandoned, of grinding down a will until only compliance remains. Verdun is chosen because of geography and memory, because a nation's pride gathers there like water in a basin, because if you press the rim hard enough, everything inside will strain and crack. The plan has a name that feels like a verdict, cool and legalistic, as if the battlefield were a courtroom and the guns would argue in thunder. On the French side, responsibility sits on narrow shoulders and broad ones alike. In the trenches and woodlots, units rotate in and out, stamping life back into feet, thawing hands over small pocket stoves, reciting letters quietly to themselves, just to hear something warm. Rations arrive in rattling limbers down white roads. A section leader checks a periscope, wipes the lens, checks again. A machine gun team rehearses the same motion over and over. Feed, charge, sight, pause. Nearby, an officer studies a map spread on a crate, a single lantern illuminating ridgelines in a soft orange pool. The forts appear as thick, pale blocks, the ravines as thin blue veins, the villages as little black squares. He traces a finger to Douaumont and stops there, as though the name resists being passed over too quickly. At Verdun itself, the citadel sits beneath the town like a hidden lung. Inside, passageways smell faintly of damp stone and lamp smoke. Clerks sort messages at long tables, their pencils tapping. Runners come and go at a trot, rubber soles whispering. In one arched chamber, maps are pinned to cork. pins linked by taut threads, red and blue, forming a web that tightens at the moose. The officers speak softly, as if the air had ears. They talk of sectors, of relief schedules, of ammunition allotments by caliber. They talk of the forts, what remains, what can be repaired, who commands, how long each can stand if isolated. They do not linger on those last questions. Out in the dark, Colonel Driant walks the edge of Bois de Cour with his chasseurs. He has the air of a schoolmaster who never quite took off the habit of careful instruction. He pauses to listen, head slightly inclined, one gloved hand resting on a tree. He gives the orders calmly, as if discussing a hike rather than the thin end of a coming storm. Strengthen the forward foxholes. Run a cable to the supporting trench. Check the fields of fire toward the clearing. Keep the sentries doubled until dawn. The men nod, vanishing in twos into the scrim of branches. Beneath the snow, the soil remembers autumn leaves. When their shovels bite, a faint scent rises. Wet loam, dead grass, the memory of quiet seasons. In the forts, caretakers of concrete tend to their routines. In Douaumont, the corridors are long, damp, and oddly intimate. A metal door coughs when it opens. Pipes tick with cold. Somewhere, a droplet falls into a puddle at a regular interval. An inverted metronome. A gun crew checks the workings of a turret that can rise and sink like a breath. Its steel skin is cold to the touch, its bolts black and clean. Ammunition is stacked in graded rows, chalked with numbers that look like dates. Far below, in a magazine, candles are kept in a metal locker, a glow for when electricity falters, a reminder that even engineered darkness can be softened. The weather has delayed the enemy. Everyone knows it. Rumors travel faster than units can march, and even the most skeptical sergeant has learned to weigh a rumor like rations. The attack was expected days ago, then postponed again as snow thickened the air, and winds turned the forest into a pipe organ. The postponements feel like reprieves and threats at once, like a moratorium at the gallows. Men sleep more shallowly. Even the mules turn their heads toward the sound of any distant thud, as if counting seconds between heartbeats. On the left bank beyond the river, low hills called Morhomme and Côte, 304 are black humps against the sky, their names a language of forewarning. On the right bank, where the great effort will fall, the ground folds and refolds, ravines that drink fog, spurs that look down on open fields, little villages tucked into hollows, Bras, Ornes, Beaumont, Louvemont, each with a church and a few stone houses, each with an identity that seems too delicate to be said in the same breath as the guns that wait. Roadside shrines watch over crossroads, their painted saints flaking under frost. Supply convoys grind through the night. Wheels creak, chains clatter, hooves spark faintly off frozen stones. The men riding with them sit bundled and narrow-eyed, blankets pulled tight, hands in mittens that smell of smoke. They speak of coffee and a bed with real sheets, of a room with shutters against morning light, of a single uninterrupted night's sleep. The words are not complaints, they are talismans, carried like pocket charms. In the pause between turns of the wheel, you can hear the forest. A branch unloading its snow with a soft collapse, a fox threading the underbrush, the thin zip of wind through pine needles. At first light, frost paints every wire a thin white. The moose exhales steam. A few shells fall at random, single notes plucked on a far instrument. And then there is nothing. Patrols lie still, low to the earth, eyes grazing the tree line. Sentries check their watches as though time needs supervision. Light builds slowly, pallid, hesitant. The air tastes metallic, like a coin held under the tongue. And still, nothing. Down in a staff dugout, a message arrives with the cold on it. A junior officer reads it twice, then takes it to his superior. The wording is dry, the meaning urgent. Aerial reconnaissance reports additional batteries emplaced overnight. Roads east of the river bear heavy traffic. Camouflage nets gleam faintly where frost has formed on them. The older officer nods, not because he is reassured, but because the shape of the thing is now the shape he expected. He takes a pencil and writes a single line across his map. Prepare to receive. The pencil leaves a gray scar over the ridges. By evening, the sky closes again, a lid applied to a simmering pot. Lamps return in the dugouts and the forts, in cook shelters and aid posts. Tea brews, soup warms, a crust of bread is softened over steam. A chaplain walks the trench with quiet steps, offering a word here, a glance there, a presence more than any sentence. A private studies a photograph so long the paper warms under his fingers. Another rewinds a wristwatch and sets it by a sergeant's pocket watch. The two ticking instruments finding harmony. A corporal checks the range cards once more, sliding them back into their tin. And then, deep under the ordinary hush, something changes. It is not a sound, but a pressure, a compression of the very air, as if the forest holds its breath. Animals go still. Flame in a lantern bends slightly, uncertain. In the distance, metal begins to speak in a low, assembling murmur. One battery reports to another, then another. The conversations overlapping until the forest no longer knows itself as a forest, but as a chamber where thunder rehearses. A man in a forward trench looks up and feels that new weight press the skin of his face. He tightens the strap of his helmet, not out of fear, but precision, as though answering a roll call. He passes along a word that needs only one syllable. It crosses the trench, moves through a communication sap, walks a buried line, and surfaces in the forts in a single breath. Hands grip hand wheels, lanyards are checked. A phone buzzer rattles, and a voice says softly, "Stand by." Night has one more hour to give. Frost cracks on a branch and falls like powder, painting the back of a greatcoat. The muse keeps moving, indifferent and constant. In the citadel, a clock ticks toward the hour noted in a plan written far away. In the woods, the black mouths of guns tilt a fraction, correct, and wait for the second hand to click into place. When it does, the valley opens its throat and roars. The first shells come like doors blown inward, slamming into the earth with a force that shakes the ribs. Snow rises in dark plumes. Air becomes splintered wood, crushed clay, shattered stone. And within that first terrible chord, another sound emerges, the stubborn, human sound of voices finding each other in the noise, passing orders that are also promises. Hold here, hold now, hold until relief arrives, hold because this is the place. Above the roar, the hills keep their names. Tourmente, Vaux, Froid de Terre, beacons in a storm no light can penetrate. The night that began so quietly does not end. It is merely broken into 1,000 pieces. Behind every piece, a pulse steadies itself, and the words that will define this place gather themselves, unspectacular and absolute. They shall not pass. The roar does not ebb. It learns to breathe. Waves of fire roll in measured pulses, an iron tide that rises, pauses, and rises again. You can feel the pattern before you can think it. Short lifts from the light batteries, then the deep-chested crash of the heavies, the ground flexing under each blow. The forest that was a map of paths and clearings becomes a geometry of voids. Trees lose their crowns, then their trunks, then their names. Snow turns to mud, mud turns to slurry, and the slurry begins to boil. Cables snap like bowstrings. Field telephones go blind one after another. In a dugout cut into the chalk, a signalman works by touch, finding broken ends, stripping, splicing, testing the line with a crank magneto whose little flywheel hums like a toy. For a moment, the buzzing voice returns, faint, distant, official, and then a shell lands near the pole line, and the world jerks sideways again. The signalman puts the handset down, with the care of someone laying a head on a pillow, and reaches for a runner's armband. Above him, the ceiling dust sifts in a steady veil. At Bois de Cours, Colonel Driant moves along the wounded edge of the wood, his chasseurs arrayed in nests they have prepared with stubborn attention, traversed fire trenches, bombing posts, shallow foxholes set like notes on a staff. The first day is a study in subtraction, of trees, of landmarks, of certainty. But the rhythm of command remains simple and human. Raise your head only when you must. Count the shells by their approach. Breathe between the lifts. When the barrage creeps, you creep back the distance of a breath. He leaves a hand briefly on a man's shoulder, and it is steadier than words. By late morning, the barrage opens shallow wounds in its own fabric. Through the rents, skirmish lines appear, dark figures moving in short darts, hugging folds of ground, stopping as if listening, then moving again. They are careful, almost quiet against the violence that escorts them. They thread the cut lanes, cross the shattered thickets, take shelter in shell holes freshly made for them. Rifles and machine guns answer in bursts, stitched tracers combing the pale air. The first German probing parties are pushed back, not dramatically, just firmly, like a door shouldered closed and barred from within. Across the right bank, names blur and return under dust and smoke. Herbebois, Orne, Haumont. Villages fold in upon themselves. A gable remains, then a door, then a single hinge bright against a blackened frame. Church clocks, shocked loose from their housings, rest face up in rubble and tell the wrong hour indefinitely. In each place, someone has made a decision to use a cellar as a post, a wall as a firing rest, a culvert as a communication trench. In each place, the decision holds until it doesn't. The guns take lunch and return to work. At Douaumont, the armored turrets lie low and listen. Their crews feel the concussions as pressure in the gut, a hand that presses and releases. Condensation beads on steel like sweat. A periscope sneaks up, pinches a glimpse of a world erased, and slips down again. In a gallery 2 levels below, a clerk sharpens a pencil and writes times on a sheet pinned to a board. When the electricity flickered, when the telephone from the gorge battery sang, when the last ration tins arrived, dented but intact. He writes slowly, carefully, as though the act itself could knit the day into coherence. As afternoon sours toward evening, the forest gives up pieces of itself that cannot be reclaimed. Driant's rightmost outposts feel a pressure along their flank. First, a rumor of movement, then the particular unmistakable sound of men catching their breath after a rush. Grenades trade hands and arcs, the explosions small, personal. An NCO counts the last dozen and breaks them into equal shares with calm arithmetic. When the ammo crates finally arrive, 2 men staggering under each, faces gray with dust and effort, the relief is not triumphant, it is practical. Hands move, lids lever off, belts fed, pockets filled. The line is restitched by will and habit. Night descends without darkness. Leaping light paints the undersides of the smoke, and the smoke clings to the low ground like an animal that refuses to be dislodged. Along the Meuse, the river's breath thickens and swallows the edges of things. On the left bank, Mort-Homme and Côte 304 crouch like sleeping beasts. On the right, patrols slide out in twos, ghosts against a backdrop of flame. They leave with passwords spoken softly and return with corners of the day in their hands. A note found in a pocket, the insignia ripped from a tunic, a sketch of a machine gun sighting on a scrap of paper. Each little find is a candle held up against a cavern. The second day begins with a new grammar. The barrage is not merely heavy, it is specific. Batteries walk their fire across the woodlots with a draftsman's discipline, square by square. Observation balloons, tethered far back, peer through rents in the cloud. Low, gray aircraft drone in pairs, engines beating like offset hearts. Whenever a battery fires too freely, a retaliatory weight settles on it until it falls silent. Then the weight lifts and moves on, auditioning other targets. It is impersonal and attentive at once. In the command posts behind the lines, maps are revised with ink that carries the sharp smell of violets. A staff officer prints letters carefully along a ridge that no longer quite exists. Relief columns are ordered forward. Reserves are shifted like a hand rearranging stones on a go board. The unspoken question becomes a spoken one. How long can the right bank be held in front of the forts, and what does it cost to try? At Herbebois, the answer comes in the simple form of absence. A trench that was manned at dawn is empty by noon, not because its defenders failed, but because the trench itself has been taken back into the earth. Men reappear 20 meters rearward, streaked with clay, eyes bright with the particular light of those who have seen too much of the same color. They drink, they cough, they report in sentences with verbs and objects, and at the end of each report is the same small refrain: "We can hold for now." Driant's chasseurs fight that second day with the poise of people who have rehearsed for a storm and met it. They pivot, refusing to be turned. They fall back by sections, not by panic. They use every stump, every fold, every shard of wall. When ammunition runs low, they fire less and aim more. In a lull, Driant studies what was once a contour line and is now a seam of raw clay. He knows what he is asking of them, and asks it anyway, not with rhetoric, but with presence. His cap is dusted white at the brim. His gloves are nicked by briars that no longer exist. By late afternoon, German assault groups find purchase along the northern edge of the wood. They do not surge. They seep through shallow draws and collapsed trenches, across places where barbed wire lies in coils like dead eels. A machine gun that had anchored the line is silenced not by a frontal rush but by a detour and a grenade, placed with almost domestic care. The line kinks but does not break. Behind it, stretcher teams wait for the barrage lifts as swimmers wait for a wave, stepping into the forward ground, counting, stepping again, returning with weight and warmth and silence. The second night is shorter. Fires glow where villages used to be, orange bowls set into the landscape. In a cellar at Beaumont, An aid post smells of carbolic, cold iron, damp wool. A doctor's hands move without pause. A sergeant writes tags with a stub pencil. A kettle hisses and is always almost empty. Outside, a mule stands with its head low, steam lifting from its flanks. A private sits on a step with a cup of something hot between both hands, not drinking, only holding the heat. Dawn finds the third day already awake. The barrage returns in a voice an octave lower, as if the batteries themselves are tired but stubborn. South of Haumont, ground that had been contested becomes unambiguous. Posts overrun. Small groups compelled rearward by pressure that is more constant than heroic. On a hillside, stripped to chalk, a platoon discovers that their field of fire is now a field of sight only. The ammunition they were promised diverts to a sector whose name they have not heard before. At the edge of Bois des Cours, Drouin gathers what remains of his 2 battalions into a line that is no longer straight, but is still a line. Orders arrive that are not a surprise. You have done what could be done. Withdraw by echelons. Deny the enemy the easy road through the wood. He nods, and the nod passes from mouth to mouth with the same dignity. We fall back because we choose the ground, not because the ground chooses us. As they peel away, a shell finds the place where he stands, conferring with his officers. The air is torn. The group scatters. When the dust settles, the men move toward their colonel with the automatic refusal to admit what they already know. He is lifted, carried, set down. The words he has left are straight, simple, sufficient. The line continues to move as he asked it to move. By midday, the right bank is a gallery of thresholds. Behind the broken woods, the great forts sit like submerged shapes. Douaumont high and broad-backed, Vaux tense and purposeful. Their turrets show and hide like cautious animals. Their garrisons measure the world by vibrations. The heavies deep as organs. The mediums like doors slammed 2 floors up. The lights like crockery dropped in a distant kitchen. Rations arrive in awkward bundles, messages in shorter sentences. A rumbling fear passes along some corridors, not of the enemy, but of irrelevance, that the fight might pass around them as water passes around a rock. And yet, across the river, the left bank begins to stir. Columns grind along the Bar-le-Duc road, that thin lifeline of cobbles and will. Lorries nose forward in a file that seems endless, drivers blinking grit from their eyes, gendarmes stepping into the road with a whistle and a raised hand when a wheel flirts with the ditch. Farm carts wedge between artillery limbers. Bread vans hum behind ambulances. A single cyclist threads the gaps with a satchel at his hip like a homing bird. Every kilometer marked off is counted again in the mind, a rosary of distance. In the citadel, orders adjust like optics. Reserves are named and sent. Artillery schedules are rewritten so that the lifts match the ground as it is, not as it was. The words change subtly, from hold forward of the forts to hold on the approaches, from counterattack at once to counterattack at nightfall if possible. No one needs the shift explained. Everyone feels it in their bones. A staff captain, jaw tight with fatigue, writes one line at the top of a new page. Verdun will be defended on this bank. He does not underline it. He does not need to. Through the afternoon, the German infantry presses the edges of the plateau, feeling for the seams. Between Beaumont and Louvemont, small parties test the ravines that lead toward Douaumont's northern face. The fort looks back with blank eyes. Its glacis is a smear of churned clay and splintered timber. Its ditch holds water and ash. The ground here has the heavy, indifferent look of places that have seen siege before. Somewhere deep within, a man winds a clock that does not care who owns it. As evening comes for the third time, the sky lowers again, and the world withdraws into its own noise. The right bank has been bent, but not broken. The left bank has awakened and begun to feed the fire, rather than be consumed by it. In the dark, a battalion coming up from the south pauses at a crossroads, where a shrine once watched the way. The icon is gone. The niche is cracked. The little roof tile lies face down in the ditch. The men adjust their packs and move on, guided by shouted numbers and a lantern cupped in a hand. Somewhere ahead, through the smear of smoke and the drum of guns, a great mass of stone and steel waits on its hill, patient in its own way. It has not yet yielded. It has not yet been asked the precise question that the enemy has come to ask. The forest that sheltered the approach is almost gone. The clearings have been made anew by high explosive, larger, starker, mercilessly straight. The path is open now, and the night knows it. Under that night, in dugouts, in galleries, under tarpaulins stretched from broken wagons, men sleep because they must. Their rest is shallow but real. Boots stay on. Rifles rest within reach. A watch is set and checked and rechecked. In the pause between shells, breath rises in pale plumes and fades. The story has moved forward by hours and meters, by names struck through and names underlined, by ground yielded and ground measured again. The sentence that was whispered on the first night is no longer a whisper. It is written on boards hastily painted, scrawled on dugout doors, repeated at relief points, spoken into telephones when the line lives long enough to carry it. It moves from mouth to mouth as if it were heat. Dawn comes thin and uncertain, a bleached light sifting through smoke, revealing shapes that were hills and woods, and are now only contours of loss. The third night's embers still glow in shell holes. The fourth day inhales, and with that breath the battle sharpens its question. The barrage does not flatten the land any more. It carves it, nudging men and paths toward one high, broad shape that sits like a grounded ship on the plateau, a fort whose stone remembers older wars and older vows. Around it, the ground is a script torn and rewritten. Patrols move with the care of locksmiths. They study ditches and caponiers, count paces from shattered stumps, trace the lip of the dry moat with gloved fingers. Doors that were sealed by doctrine are tested by patience. A counterscarp gallery, cracked but intact, peers across an emptiness that once protected and now invites. The air tastes of chalk and iron. Somewhere close, metal whispers against metal in a rhythm too calm for a battlefield. Inside the fort, life is measured in echoes. Long galleries breathe cold. A fan coughs and steadies. A watch is tapped and placed by a lamp whose wick has learned restraint. The garrison is a skeleton of caretakers and a handful of infantry, men who know the pipes by sound, the doors by weight, the stairwells by the way their steps return to them. A telephone rings with a tired insistence, and a voice reports what it has seen from a periscope. Smoke, movement in ravines, the suggestion of ladders where no ladders should be. The reply is steady and brief. Stay observant. Conserve ammunition. Report again in 10 minutes. Beyond the ditch, men in field gray flow rather than charge. They have studied this flank in silence, rehearsed the angles, noted the blind spots where embrasures look past rather than at. A small party drops into the moat where debris makes a gentle staircase of ruin. Fingers test a grate. A hinge decides it has kept faith long enough. The door opens the way old doors open, with surprise and regret, not with drama. A corridor swallows them. Their boots make soft, hollow sounds that the stone chooses not to carry far. On the roof, a turret shows a sliver and sinks. The crew below work by the logic of machines. Hand wheels, gauges, checks. Every concussion outside is a pressure in the gut, a vibration in the soles. A runner brings a note folded small, as if folding it tighter might shrink the news. The note says only that footsteps have been heard in the counterscarp, and that a listening post has not answered twice. The officer nods and writes a time next to the message. He underlines nothing. He sends the runner back with 2 words that mean continue and wait. The intruders move as if the fort itself were a map they have learned by touch. A stairwell, a turn, a door that opens inward, a passage lit by a single bulb trembling on a long wire, a shot but not a volley, a shout but not an alarm, a grenade rolled with the same care you might use placing a cup on a saucer in a quiet house. The blast is close, contained, final. An armory is found before it is defended. A corridor is held before it is contested. By the time voices rise in the right rooms, the wrong ones are already occupied. News travels like heat. In a dugout behind the plateau, an officer listens to a breathless report that refuses to say the one thing it is saying. He writes calmly, then stops writing, then folds the paper and puts it in his pocket without thinking. The order that leaves his mouth is simple and heavy. Counterattack at once. Nearby units peel men from every post that will bend without breaking. Engineers hand out satchel charges with hands that smell of cordite and oil. A captain ties a scarf higher against the chill and says that they will retake what is theirs. He says it with conviction, and also with the knowledge that conviction is not a key. They go up into a light harsh as glass. The slopes that approach the fort have become a catalogue of obstacles, tree stumps torn to fists, wires sprawled like dead serpents, shell holes brimming with icy water that smells of fresh earth and old stone. Machine guns comb the ground methodically, as if cutting hair. The men advance in short, exact motions. 6 steps, down, 5 breaths, a rush to the next patch of churned clay that is slightly less exposed than the last. They reach the ditch in 2s and 3s and discover what the morning has already decided. Grenades arc down and up in tight exchanges. A ladder goes over, wobbles, slides back, is hauled up again by hands that have chosen pain over distance. Inside, in deep rooms, where the noise arrives as a distant weather, a captured phone is lifted and hears only static. A lamp is turned down not to save fuel, but because bright light feels like a confession. The fort's old lungs, its ventilators, its shafts, pull and push air that smells of dust newly woken. In a gallery, a man with chalk writes numbers on a steel door that bears older numbers half erased by grease. The new numbers are of a different language, but the door is indifferent. Doors are loyal only to hinges. Word circles Verdun like a hawk. In the citadel beneath the town, a briefing breaks the air like thin glass. There is no histrionics, only the slight stiffening of backs, the pencils that pause and then resume with firmer lines. Fort Douaumont, high, heavy, intended as a shield, is no longer a question. It is an absence that must be filled with other answers. Orders go out along tunnels of cable and through the mouths of messengers, stabilize the approaches, anchor on Voke and the intermediate works, choke the roads that lead from the new foothold to the heart of the position. That evening, a new presence arrives from the south, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable in its effect. A commander whose strength is the weight of his attention. He looks first to the guns, recalibrates schedules, pairs observation with fire, demands that each shell have a reason, and each reason a map reference. He looks next to the men, and the rhythm that will keep them from breaking. Divisions will rotate before they are used up. The line will be held by a wheel of faces rather than a single mask of exhaustion. He does not promise ease. He promises method, and method is a kind of mercy. To feed that method, a road becomes a vow. From Bar-le-Duc northward, the cobbles and dirt are stitched into a living artery. Lorries grind in a file that seems to have no beginning and no end, their lamps hooded, their cargoes stacked with the precision of hunger. Gendarmes stood at attention in the wet and the cold, whistles at their lips, hands raised and lowered like metronomes to keep the beat. Farm carts slot into gaps like notes in a bar. A driver wraps a scarf around his mouth and leans forward as if willing the truck itself to breathe. They call this line of movement sacred, not because of miracles, but because it is kept, minute after minute, mile after mile, without interruption, without excuse. Tires cut new grooves into old stone. Steam rises from radiators in the backs of horses. The road learns each name and returns it as strength. Across the river, dark heaps called Mort Homme and Côte 304 brood under a lid of smoke. The guns there speak a protective language, answering threats on the right bank with iron syllables. Their crews work by touch and by number, loading, laying, firing, recording, adjusting. The world outside their pits reduced to coordinates, and the rise and fall of reports coming over buried lines. When the enemy turns toward those hills to silence them, the hills answer by being stubborn and hard to climb, by absorbing and returning punishment with the patience of geology. Back before Douaumont, the counterattacks repeat like a hard lesson. Night raids feel for seams along the moat. Signals flicker and go dark. A storming party reaches a door and finds it locked by a discipline that has learned the corridors faster than the day allows. A man touches the stone with his open hand, not in affection, but in recognition. This weight is now the weight they will have to carry for weeks, perhaps months. He pulls his hand back, and the grit leaves a white print on his glove, like a faded emblem. Inside Fort Vaux, a smaller, taughter shape than its fallen neighbor, the garrison listens through stone. Their commander walks the galleries with a notebook and a voice that wastes nothing. He knows what has been lost on the plateau and what that means for his own hill of concrete and will. He checks the pumps, the water, the stores, the vents. He notes where the masonry has cracked and whose hands have mended it with quick, practical courage. He does not decorate his words. He distributes resolve as if it were a ration to be eaten slowly. In the open ground between the works, the air acquires a new constant, the steady drone of aircraft engines circling like patient insects in a jar of cloud. Balloons hang back, eyes tethered to the earth by heavy cords. Corrections drift down the lines, left 30, lengthen 200, repeat for battery, until the map begins to align again with the land, until the land begins, ever so slightly, to obey. The men on the line learn a new calendar, day and night. Yes, but also lift and crash, relief and return, smoke that drifts east and smoke that hugs the ground, flares that mean advance and flares that mean lie down and become part of the earth until the sky tires. In that calendar there are also private holidays, a hot drink that arrives all the way forward, a letter that has not been chewed thin by the journey, a replacement pair of socks still carrying the smell of soap. These are not luxuries. They are anchors sunk in shifting ground. The loss of the high fort does not end the sentence that began with the first shells. It lengthens it, adding commas where periods were expected. The plateau is no longer a wall. It is a funnel. The enemy has stepped through the first door and found only a corridor leading to other doors, each smaller, each meaner, each watched by people who have decided that watching is a form of love for those behind them. In headquarters, in gun pits, in aid posts, in the narrow space between two sandbags where a single pair of eyes can see just enough. The same words circulate, not as a slogan now, but as a habit, as breath. Night returns, and with it a workable dark. The guns do not sleep, but they grow less curious. Fires burn in bowls of ruin on the horizon. Somewhere a mule shakes its head, and the bells on its harness make a dry domestic sound, and the sound cuts through the iron like a thread of human color. Along the sacred road, a truck stalls, coughs, catches. Another takes its place. The line never breaks. In the fort that stands and the fort that has been taken, clocks tick, indifferent to ownership, loyal only to time. The men who went up the slope and came back down again, with fewer voices among them, lie on boards and blankets, eyes open or eyes shut, breathing the same cold air, accepting the same thin comfort, that the line is still a line, that the river still flows, that the road still feeds, that the hills still answer, that the next door will be harder than the last, that endurance can be a blade. In that shared understanding, the vow grows quieter and stronger, a current under speech. They shall not pass. Morning sifts in as a pale suggestion, a thin wash of light laid over smoke and frost. The plateau breathes in bursts, gunfire, then quiet, then gunfire again, like a giant whose sleep is troubled but deep. On the road from Bar-le-Duc, the convoy never ends. Headlamps hooded, radiators steaming, canvas flapping, an artery that refuses to pulse irregularly. A gendarme's whistle marks time. A gloved hand rises and falls. Drivers lean forward as if their bodies could pull the trucks by will alone. Bread, shells, wire, stretchers, letters, more shells. The road remembers each name and returns it as endurance. Behind the lines, method becomes shelter. Schedules are redrawn with a pencil that does not shake. Batteries paired with observers, sectors boxed in grid squares, each square given a voice and a weight. Buried cables creep outward like roots, armored where they can be, marked by pegs where they cannot. A staff officer writes in the margin of a map, tight-lipped and steady. Fire conquers, men hold. The phrase is not bravado. It is logistics, given the dignity of a sentence. On the right bank, the land leans upward toward Vaux and Thiaumont, toward the bare back of Côte de Poivre and the scarred lip of the Fleury Plateau. Smoke crawls the ravines and rests there, thinking. Patrols move like careful handwriting along lines no longer on any map. Ditch to stump to shell hole, shell hole to a chunk of masonry that used to be a doorway. A runner arrives at a company post with a message scrawled on a torn ration label. The North Trench is gone. The men are not. We have shifted 10 paces back to where the ground can be persuaded to help. The officer nods once. The answer comes as a ration of words. Hold by 2s, count by 10s, use the night. The loss of the high fort hangs over the field like weather. It sharpens questions, narrows choices, strips habits down to essentials. Counterattacks have found the approaches to be long, roofless corridors swept by exacting fire. Each rush forward is a lesson in angles, each pause an argument with the slope and the wind. Yet each night, small parties slip out with sacks and wire cutters and return with samples of the future. A new trench line begun in chalk, a gun position probed and left alone for later, a name learned for a copse that no longer has trees. They carry their quiet victories back like embers cupped against the cold. Within Fort Vaux, discipline becomes a kind of warmth. The commander walks the galleries where lamps are trimmed low, speaking in sentences that fit exactly the space between 2 doors. Pumps are checked, cistern levels noted in a small book whose corners have softened with handling. Ventilators thrum, steady, uncomplaining. A mason's patch on a cracked arch holds. Men measure their day in tasks that attach the present to the future. Stack, oil, test, label. In a casemate, a chalk line marks the height of water and the height of resolve. Both are watched. Neither is wasted. Across the river, the left bank wakes fully, dark hills hunched under a lid of noise. Mort Homme and Côte 304, names that sound like verdicts. Their guns speak in protective syllables, iron commas that interrupt any sentence aimed at the right bank. When the enemy turns to silence those hills, he finds them made of patience and steepness, and the stubborn geometry of defending crests. Forward slope denied, reverse slope prepared. Observation traded for survival until the moment comes to speak again. The ground there is a mill. It grinds everything fed to it down to decisions. Above the plateau, new sounds stitch themselves into the day. Balloons hang back like tethered thoughts. Observers peer through slits and write down the way smoke drifts off an impact, the way a grove breathes when shells walk through it. Aircraft circle in pairs and triplets, engines beating on slightly different notes, a moving ceiling for those below. Corrections travel down the wires in clipped phrases that make sense to those who must understand them. Drop 100. Left 30. Repeat for battery. Guns adjust, and the world adjusts with them. In the town of Verdun, the cathedral stones take on the habit of listening. The citadel beneath hums at a low pitch. Boot falls, hand carts. The muted beehive of a place that has decided not to be surprised anymore. A hospital courtyard smells faintly of carbolic and wet wool. Between concussions, you can hear the ordinary. Enamel mugs set down carefully, a broom across stone, paper stacked square. The town holds its breath and then breathes, holds and breathes, refusing to become only an address for shells. The enemy presses again along the slopes that lead to Vaux. They come in files that break into groups that break into threes, then into the single urgency of a man, and the ground immediately in front of him. Grenades pass hand to hand like blunt messages. Machine gun scythes stitch and restitch the same strips of churned clay, until the clay itself seems to flinch. A party reaches the lip of a dry moat and pauses there. Suddenly small, suddenly alone, then slides back into the smoke with the careful speed of the living. Artillery duels take on a new clarity. Counter-battery fire is less a hunt than a ledger. Muzzle, flash marked, report timed, angle deduced, answer sent. Batteries that shout are answered. Batteries that whisper are taught to shout by observers, who guide the full weight onto them for a measured minute, then slide it away as if politely. In gun pits, crews move with a shared memory that needs few words. Ram, close, lay, fire, listen, adjust. They are wet to the wrists, powder grimed to the teeth, but their routine is a roof against panic. Relief becomes religion. The rotation, units flowing up in the dusk and down in the dawn, keeps faces fresher than fear alone would allow. A battalion marches off the line with the 1,000-yard silence of those who have been to the brink and stepped back. Another passes them in the opposite direction, boots thudding the same notes, eyes catching for a second, and saying everything that can be said without speech. At the relief points, coffee steams in dented pots. Bread is broken with the gravity of a ceremony. Someone counts spare socks as if they were silver. A rumor walks the trenches faster than orders. The next blow will fall across the whole mouth of the Meuse, left bank and right. A pressure meant to pry open the hills while squeezing the approaches to Vaux and Fleury. The rumor has the ring of exactness. Ammunition is moved at night with the care one gives to sleeping things. Reserve lines are scraped into being with picks that strike sparks off stone. Range cards are updated and slid back into their tins like songs tucked away for later. It comes at evening, as such things often do. The sky lowers, and in that lowering the first chords assemble. Probing barrages that feel for batteries, rifle grenades that arch and settle, harassing fires along roads where trucks refuse to do anything but continue. Then the heavies lift their shoulders and the hills answer, and for an hour the air is a single instrument, with too many hands upon it. When the storm breaks open, it does so not as a single wave, but as intersecting tides, thrusts toward the ravines north of Vaux, presses against the folds before Thiaumont, hammer blows on the dark humps west of the river where the French guns have been unkind all week. In that chaos, small balances are kept. A platoon lays a short belt of wire and lives to hide behind it. An aid post pulls 3 men out of a crater between lifts and finds that the third can walk with an arm over each shoulder. A section discovers that their last box of ammunition is not the last after all, because someone 2 days before tucked a handful of clips under a board and forgot to mention it, then remembered at the right moment. These are not miracles. They are the working parts of fate. Night deepens. Flares write brief poems that end too quickly. The sacred road murmurs without pause. Engines, hooves, breath. In the galleries of Vaux, a watch is wound, a valve adjusted, a note made on a page whose earlier lines were neat, and whose later lines wander when the hand grew tired. The commander walks once more, counting, touching, speaking names. He stops at a door and listens. Beyond it, the fort's skin hums with impacts that pass through stone like rain through leaves. He sets his palm against the wall and feels not fear but responsibility expressed as temperature. Toward midnight, the pressure on Mortaume ebbs a fraction. Not because it has been discouraged, but because the day's arithmetic demands a new page. On the right bank, the lines in front of Vaux are still lines, bent, thin, irregular, alive. The approach from Douaumont Hill remains a corridor haunted by sudden light. The enemy has not found a straight path. The defenders have not received a reprieve. Between those two truths, the valley holds its breath and then exhales again. Men sleep in narrow slices. Boots stay on. Rifles rest where hand can find them in the dark. A lantern is hooded. A letter is folded and placed beneath a tunic like extra armor. Somewhere in the tangle near Thiaumont, a messenger sets off with a scrap of paper and a phrase to be said exactly. Hold to the ditch until dawn, then rake the slope in front of you, and do not move. He repeats it aloud as he jogs, a catechism to keep his feet honest. By the hour before morning, the guns fall into a lower gear, not silence, but a workable hum. The road continues. The river continues. The vow continues, no longer an answer to a question, but the floor on which all questions stand. On the hills, on the slopes, under the earth, in the long rooms of concrete and in the short scoops of mud, it is spoken softly so that it can last, so that it can be breathed rather than shouted. Morning returns like a habit, thin light laid over smoke, frost beating on twisted wire, breath rising in pale threads that vanish as quickly as they're made. The plateau no longer feels like a place. It feels like a task. Every ridge and ravine asks the same question in a different tone, and the guns supply their answers in measured thunder. Sentries learn the day by sound alone. The deep-bellied call of the heavies, the quick stitching of machine guns combing the broken slopes, the far hum of engines searching the sky for eyes. The struggle tilts westward. Across the Meuse, two dark humps, Mort Homme and Côte 304, take the pressure meant to quiet the guns that keep the right bank alive. Their names harden into verdicts. The hills do not move, so everything upon them must. Crests are shaved into steps. Steps are eaten into pits. Pits widen until they touch, and the land becomes a single pitted mask. On forward lips of trench, men lie behind parapets that are no longer walls but suggestions. They count shells by approach and breathe in the brief spaces between, letting the earth hold what their hands cannot. Artillery turns into a ledger with no final sum. Counter-battery duels unfold like arithmetic problems solved in smoke. A flash, a count, a bearing, a reply. Observers in tethered balloons watch the hills breathe, dust rising, dust settling, and speak in clipped corrections that travel down armored cable like iron prayers. Lo, quick aircraft harvest glimpses through rents in cloud and are chased off or not. Each pass a coin toss. A map in a dugout collects pinholes like constellations. Each pin carries a scrap of truth wrestled from noise. Method keeps breath in the body. Reserves flow forward on a schedule that refuses to be heroic and insists on being exact. The road from Bar-le-Duc hums without pause, a living artery of lorries, horse teams, ambulances, bread vans, even farm carts obedient to whistles and gestures. The line never breaks. When a truck stalls, hands appear from the dark, push, curse softly, coax it back into the flow. Another nose slides neatly into its wake. The road acquires a sanctity not from miracles, but from stubborn, sleepless obedience. On the right bank, the approaches to Vauques and the slopes below Thiaumont and Côte de Poivre turn into roofless corridors. Patrols write their routes in caution. Stump to lip, lip to shell hole to a slab of masonry that remembers being a doorway. In the afternoons, pressing attacks arrive like tides, gray files that break into threes and then into the single urgency of a man and a meter of ground. Grenades talk across distances too short to measure, their voices curt, decisive. Sometimes a party reaches the lip of a dry moat and hangs there, very small under all that sky, then smears back into smoke with the careful panic of those the day has spared. Within Vaux, discipline glows like banked coals. The commander walks low galleries, counting out loud, not to comfort, to verify. Water level, powder stock, rations by the day, candles by the hour, the tempo of the ventilators, the habit of the pumps. A crack in an arch is ringed in chalk, dated, eyed again an hour later. The men speak in short sentences tuned to the rooms they fill. In the casemate where the telephone hangs, the handset is lifted, the line listened to, the handset set down with a care that says, "This is a thread, not a rope." The sky joins the argument more openly. Fighter flights, small, quick, nervy, begin to patrol in pairs, shouldering observation aircraft away from the front like shepherd dogs refusing a wolf the right to stare. Down below, surprise becomes rare. The barrage now is a language both sides can read. Creeps and lifts are expected, parried, preempted. When the fire walks forward, rifles sink and men become earth. When it lifts, they rise and become geometry. Angles, overlaps, fields that intersect like the teeth of a careful gear. In the town, Verdun's stones take on the sound of a heartbeat. The citadel's corridors hum with boot soles and lowered voices, the air touched with lamp smoke and damp paper. In wards warmed by kettles and resolve, a steady choreography repeats. Receiving, sorting, noting, sending, everything precise so that compassion can be efficient. Above ground, the cathedral watches the horizon color and discolor, its facade chalked with dust that the wind moves, and the hands of passers-by quietly brush away. West of the river, the hills are asked to do the impossible, and sullenly they oblige. Mort-Home's forward face is scoured until it has no preference for up or down. Defenders slide onto reverse slopes and dig into the lee, trading grand views for narrow survival, their guns firing by timetable and trust. Coat 304 drinks steel until the ground itself looks bruised. When the pressure there slackens, it is not because the appetite has been fed, but because the appetite has turned its head to look for new meat, and the right bank feels the gaze settle again. Evenings bring the same careful rituals. Relief columns rise as others descend, eyes catching, sharing a second's worth of silent inventory. Mud color, set of the shoulders, what the hands do with nothing in them. At the relief points, enamel mugs clink, bread breaks with ceremony. A scrap of tobacco goes 3 ways without discussion. Socks are valued like silver. A folded letter is touched before it is put away, as if the paper itself could be made more solid by the gesture. News arrives like weather. One afternoon, it comes thin and cutting. The outer works near Thiaumont have traded hands twice before noon. The approach to Vaux has narrowed to a throat. West of the river, a trench that was there at dawn no longer has a name. Orders adjust without drama. Boundaries creep. Batteries take on squares they didn't own yesterday. A reserve intended for counterattack becomes a wedge to prevent a seam. Nobody explains these changes. Everyone recognizes the shape, a front that bends and refuses to crack. Night assaults feel for weak mortar joints in the empire of rubble. A squad reaches a culvert mouth, tastes the draft of air within, and leaves a charge in the throat. Another finds the corner of a collapsed cellar and uses it as a hinge to swing a line into a better angle. Time shrinks to the length of a fuse. Space shrinks to the reach of a hand in the dark. These gains are measured not in meters but in verbs: hold, deny, anchor, refuse. Back along the sacred road, something new hums beside the line of lorries, light rails pushed out toward the front like thin fingers, wagons rattling under loads of shells and bread. The sound is different, clatter layered under growl, and it threads into the night with an industrious impatience that feels like hope converted into motion. Gendarmes, eyes red with wind and smoke, raise and drop their hands like pendulums, keeping time when clocks cannot. By week's turn, the shape of the campaign is plain, even through smoke. The enemy has a foothold where the great fort fell, a springboard toward Vaux and Fleury. To the west, he hammers hills that refuse to grow quiet. Between these jaws, the river keeps moving and the road keeps feeding, and the command keeps the wheel of divisions turning so that no single unit is eaten whole. The line is a cord pulled tight over teeth. It thrums, but it does not snap. Inside Vaux, a lamp is turned down to save an hour for another night. A runner arrives with a note softened by damp. It says only that the approaches cough dust at odd intervals, probing shots, feeling for nerves. The commander nods, makes marks in his book, and pockets the pencil, because pencils are now rations too. He looks at the door as if it were a face and says nothing to it. The fort listens back, a vast, patient animal that has learned not to waste breath. Across the valley, Mort Homme breathes smoke and gives it back. Côte 304 hunches lower and remains a hill. On the slopes below Thiaumont, a section lays a single belt of wire and lives to hide behind it. Another discovers, at the necessary moment, a box of ammunition someone wedged beneath a duckboard 2 days ago, and annotated only in memory. Fate in this place is mechanical, made of small, well-placed decisions that interlock until they resemble luck. Toward the end of the week, afternoon light goes thin and sharp as glass. The pressure shifts again, probing strokes toward the Cayette, a hard push on the raw plateau, a testing thumb at the throat of Vaux. The answers are not theatrical. They are stubborn. A platoon that was told to hold to a ditch holds to the ditch. A battery that was told to fire until its pins run hot fires, until its pins run hot. A runner who was told to say a sentence says the sentence exactly, and the sentence fits the ground like a key. Night draws its hood. Flares stutter and die. The road murmurs with the patience of a river. In dugouts and galleries, boots stay on, rifles rest within reach. A watch is wound because time must be made to behave. Somewhere close to the stone skin of Vaux, the earth shivers with shallow knocks, testing, counting, learning. Inside, hands check latches that have been checked already. Water is sipped, not drunk. Words are saved for uses that need them. The valley sleeps in slices and awakens in pieces, but the vow that threads the hours remains unbroken. It no longer shouts. It hums in the long bones, moves in the wrists that load and close and fire, steadies in the backs that lift and carry, sits quiet in the mouth behind clenched teeth. It is not a boast. It is a floor. Dawn is a thin pane of glass laid over smoke. The shallow knocks that tested the skin of Vaux become a pulse, steady and close, as if the earth itself were counting down. On the slopes outside, small shapes move with carpenter's patience, sappers feeling for seams, assault groups rehearsing turns and doorways in air. The approaches have narrowed to a throat, scraped raw by weeks of fire. Every meter now is an argument held at whispering distance. Inside the fort, discipline turns granular. Water is measured by spoon and minute. A chalk mark crawls down the wall of the cistern like a tired shadow. The commander walks his galleries with a notebook and a pencil pared to the bone. Pumps, sound, ventilators, steady. Ammunition, enough for hours, not days. Candles, counted by halves. He speaks names the way a craftsman touches tools. Doors are checked, hinges felt, latches lifted and set down again. In a listening post, a man presses his ear to stone and hears the future arrive as scratches and the faint chuff of breaths, not his own. The first push is a feeling before it is a sight. Air thickening, dust rising in a gallery that has no reason to breathe. Then the sound comes, quick and personal. Boots close to the floor, a murmur in an unfamiliar cadence, the hard acorn rattle of grenades rolling low. Corridors become mouths. The defenders answer with short, exact violence. Pistols, carbines, grenades set down rather than thrown. A lamp snuffed at the moment the door opens. The fight is not a wave. It is a series of collisions in rooms the size of a memory. Through the roof, impacts fall with the regularity of rain on a tin shed. The fort's concrete lungs exhale dust and keep exhaling. Outside, the plateau contracts. Assault groups use the broken ground like a floor plan. They thread the ditch where debris makes a staircase. They find a grate whose hinge is tired of duty. They edge along a ledge that was never meant to bear this kind of faith. Flamethrowers arrive, their carriers bent under cylinders, the nozzles snaking forward low to the ground. The first jet washes a corridor in heat, not a blaze, but a shove that drives air out of lungs and paint off iron. Stone blackens, then steams. The defenders answer with water they cannot spare, and sacks flung wet into door mouths, with fire of their own, aimed where the backlight shows a shoulder. The phone lines, tender as nerves, fail and are spliced and fail again. A message is written small and tied to a leg no thicker than a thumb. The bird launches into a sky that disapproves and returns the next day with a breast darkened by gas and rain, and a last scrap of sense delivered. We hold, water gone, air poor, pressure from 3 directions. Send help or remember us. The word remember lands harder than help. It sharpens everything it touches. Across the moors, the hills keep their bargain. Mort Ohm and Cote, 304 drink steel so that the right bank can breathe at all. Their crests are gnawed to knobs, their forward faces given up and taken back until the verbs lose their edges. Batteries there work by timetable and trust. The observer's corrections traveling down armored cables with a reverence earned the hard way. When the enemy turns and hammers those hills to buy silence, the right bank feels the pressure ease by the width of a breath and uses it. The sacred road does not blink. Lorries grind and cough and keep moving. A truck stalls and hands appear from the dark to heave and curse and coax. A wagon wheel shatters and, before the spokes are done bouncing, another cart is nose in, load shifted, line mended. Light rails creep closer on nervous feet, wagons rattling under sacks of bread and boxes of shells. A gendarme's whistle remains the law of movement. The road acquires an odor of hot oil, steam, wet rope, old wool, and a patience without rhetoric. Back at Vaux, the fight goes subterranean and intimate. Galleries that were transit become fronts. Doors become arguments. A traverse of 2 steps becomes the difference between seeing and being seen. The enemy probes with fire and with breath. The defenders counter with sandbags flung like shutters, with quick barricades of boards and iron, with a machine gun set to rake a corridor that was never meant to be raked. Men count seconds by the rhythm of their own hearts. They learn the shape of the fort by heat. Water becomes the master. Mouths are rinsed, not drunk. Lips are wiped with damp cloth and the cloth treasured like a loaf. A bucket is passed hand to hand with liturgy care. It returns lighter, and no one speaks. The chalk line on the cistern wall is a metronome keeping a funeral march. In one gallery, a man watches a droplet gather, herniate, fall from a pipe that never leaked before. He catches it with a thumb and cannot decide whether to laugh. He does neither. Above ground, counterattacks search the fort's skin like fingertips seeking a pulse. Night raids slip to the ditch and feel for ladders, for grates, for those tired hinges. Grenades go down and up in tight exchanges, the air between the throws thin and untrustworthy. A party reaches a door lip and finds it held from within by a bar and by will. They mark the hinge position with a fingernail and retreat by the length of 3 breaths. At dawn, artillery writes over the marks with explosive punctuation, and the stone replies with spalls that cut and choose without preference. The fort's commander measures time by lists that get shorter. He walks, he notes, he speaks in a voice that wastes nothing. When the ventilators falter, he assigns men to hand bellows, and their shoulders set into a rhythm between concussions. When a wall cracks, a mason's patch goes up and is sanded smooth with gloved hands. When a corridor grows too hot to hold, a block is built low and mean and ugly and perfect. He reserves his last sentences for the line that runs to the rear, still holding the main galleries, enemy in the counterscarp. Water critical, ammunition sufficient, spirit sufficient. Do not waste men to reach us if the ground says no. Outside the fort, the ground says no often. On the slopes near Thiaumont and the raw smear of the Fleury Plateau, the enemy presses to widen the corridor that Vaux is choking. The answer is stubborn geometry, overlapping fields, ditches raked by guns that lift and fall with the conscientiousness of a clock, small reserves sprung like mousetraps where a bulge threatens to become a tear. Across the river, more pressure, then less, then more again. The valley breathes with both lungs, irregular but alive. Days blur, sharpen, blur. In the fort, the heat becomes a taste. Air thins. Voices grow small to save something for later. When the flamethrowers return, the defenders fall back by the length of a door and then reclaim the door when the nozzles recoil to drink. Some fights are measured in meters. These are measured in hinges and latches, in the width of a man's shoulders. A telephone buzzes and surprises everyone by working. It carries a single phrase that the listener repeats back to prove he has it exact. The phrase is not poetry. It is instruction. It is a promise. It is a sentence to be obeyed because obedience is now a kind of love. The last water goes. There's no replacing the word with another word. Tongues swell, breath shortens, powder smoke and human heat make the air thick as cloth. The commander unpockets his pencil, and it breaks at the point. He smiles without humor and writes with the broken end, out of water, still holding. Will attempt to break contact by night if the corridor breathes. If not, will do the next thing that keeps faith with the ground. The message leaves not on wire, but by hand, a runner slipping into a world whose sky is always too bright or too dark. The answer, when it comes, is not relief but recognition. Outside, fresh attacks to pry the door open fail. They are not thrown wastefully, because waste is treason here. Batteries pour a narrow river of steel around the fort to keep a moat of violence wide. Infantry deny the exits that would turn a foothold into a highway. Vaux is isolated in a way that makes the entire plateau more defensible. The calculus is pitiless. The calculus is honest. Inside, men begin rationing not just water and air, but words. They fight by reflex trained into them, by the habit of moving their bodies where their commander's eyes point. When someone collapses, 2 others lift without being told. When a lamp gutters, a hand shields it by instinct, as if protecting the light were the same as protecting a wound. The walls sweat. The ceiling drips. The floor becomes a ledger of boot treads and ash. Somewhere, a pigeon settles and does not rise again. Someone says thank you to it. No one thinks this strange. There's an end to what stone can host and what lungs can bear. It arrives not as drama, but as arithmetic solved to 0. The chalk line has reached the mark drawn at the beginning as a warning. A last barricade holds. A last corridor breathes heat more than air. The commander looks once at the men, at their mouths, at their eyes, at the way their hands rest on their weapons like sleeping dogs, and then does the hardest, simplest thing. He chooses life over stone. The fort yields, not broken, but exhausted, and in yielding it withholds what the enemy came to buy with it, speed. Outside, the assault groups accept the decision with the cold respect of professionals who have been forced to work for every door. News folds across the valley like a gray sheet. In the citadel, backs stiffen and then bend back to the work. Orders recalibrate without rhetoric. Anchor on the ridge. Deny the road. Build the next line behind the next fold. Make the old fort an island of memory rather than a bridge. On the hills west of the river, guns answer with a protective stubbornness that sounds like faith. Along the sacred road, the file of movement does not shorten by a single truck. By night, the empty spaces where Vaux once breathed human breath feel larger than they are. The fort's galleries hold the day's heat and slowly let it go. Outside, the slope remains a corridor, but a bent one, a corridor with traps and elbows and blind corners. The enemy has won a room. He has not found the hallway to the river. The vow does not shatter with the loss of stone. It migrates to bone and nerve and schedule, to hands that lift and carry, and relay and reload without needing speeches. Somewhere near Fleury, a squad lays a belt of wire by touch and lives to use it. Near Thiaumont, a battery that was meant to be silent tonight speaks for 3 precise minutes and closes an opening that would have become a throat. In a dugout, a runner copies a sentence 3 times, so it will not be lost when the first 2 are soaked. The sentence is plain. Hold to the ditch until dawn. Rake the slope. Do not chase. He tucks 1 copy into his cap, 1 into his tunic, 1 into his boot, and goes. Toward morning, the plateau exhales a long, tired breath. The river moves, the road moves, the hills answer. The fort that fell adds weight to the word hold everywhere else. Men sleep with boots on and rifles within reach. A watch is wound because time must be made to behave. The promise spoken on the first night survives. The form changes. The meaning does not. It is quieter now, more like a pulse than a shout. But it lives where it matters. in decisions taken one at a time with unshaking hands. The fort that burned its breath away lies quiet now, a great stone lung cooling in the earth. The space it once denied is open, but not straight. The corridor bends on itself, kinked by ditches, wire, and the stubborn arithmetic of overlapping fields. Morning arrives as a pale film across the plateau, and with it a new pressure gathers in the folds between Fleury, Thiaumont, and the dark shoulder of Souville. The air carries a different taste, chemic, faintly sweet, a warning that teaches even the wind to move carefully. Across the Meuse, the hills keep their drum. Morteaume and Côte 304 absorb what the right bank cannot afford, and return what it must have: time. Their crests are so chewed that up and down feel like opinions. Observers in baskets high behind the line watch the ground breathe. Dust rising when a barrage walks, dust settling when it rests, a language of movement learned through smoke. Their notes go down armored cables like prayers spelled correctly. On the sacred road, the file never breaks. Lorries grind forward with canvas bellies full of steady answers. Shells, bread, wire, water, more shells. When one falters, hands appear from the dark to heave and coax. When a wheel splinters, another cart noses in before the spokes stop bouncing. A gendarme's whistle governs as if it were law. Light rails creep closer, thin iron veins pulsing toward the front. The road smells of hot oil, cordite dust, damp wool, and a patience that has learned not to ask for applause. The push begins in whispers, patrols testing hedges that are only stubs now, fingers finding grates that remember their hinges a little too well. Then the voice rises, barrages that fold the slopes, jets of gas that wander low, assault groups flowing through the ditches with the sober grace of craftsmen. Their compass points toward Souville, the high lid between the plateau and the town, the last hinge that would let the enemy look down on Verdun's roofs. Between them and that view are narrow ravines where machine guns rake like metronomes, and men who have decided that standing still can be an act of motion. Fleury turns into a verb. Its name passes from mouth to mouth, not as a place, but as a task done again and again. Cellars become posts, doorways become angles. A lane is held at noon and traded at dusk, and held again before dawn. Someone says it changed hands more times than he can count. He means that time there no longer obeys clocks. In one cracked wall, a date scratched by a private the week before is already half erased by Spall. He adds the date again when he comes back through and underlines it with the blunt end of a cartridge. Gas gathers in bowls the land makes for it. It is not dramatic, it is thorough. Masks go on, breaths shorten and become seconds counted in cloth. Orders are spoken slowly to fit the pace air allows. In dugouts, men learn to listen to filters as if they were watches. When the cloud thins, the guns return to their ledger, the same measured entries, the same corrections. Left 30, drop 100. Repeat for battery. It feels less like war than like music written in a key only fatigue can hear. On the right bank, Souville waits with attention all its own. Its concrete is drier and meaner than the grander shapes already traded away. It has learned from their fates. Its approaches are crossed and recrossed with fields that scissor. Its ditches are plain, its doors low and ugly, its lungs less generous and therefore harder to suffocate. The garrisons around it, little redoubts with names that sound like family, talk to each other by wire, by runner, by flare, and when all that fails, by the simple fact of still being there. Command does not shout, it edits. Schedules are refined until they feel like prayers said by heart. Divisions rotate before they fray past usefulness. Batteries pair with observers who know their squares as well as their own boots. A counterstroke doctrine takes shape not as a single blow, but as a habit. Lose a corner, stiffen the face, give a corridor, trap it with angles. Bleed for ground only if ground will pay you back in time. Orders carry less poetry and more prepositions. On, along, behind, into. Words that wrap around terrain like hands. West of the river, the hammer rises again. Mortom drinks until its forward face is flat as thought. Coat 304 digs into its reverse slope and fires by timetable and faith alone. When the pressure there grows intolerable, the right bank breathes by the width of a breath. When the right bank is clamped, the hills grunt and take another mouthful. The valley lives on two lungs, irregular and stubborn. And then a tremor comes from far beyond the Meuse, and this map, a vibration traveling through rails and rumor. A new offensive has opened elsewhere, a river of men and guns bursting out along a line that never quite left the newspapers. The effect here is not a miracle. It is a subtraction. Trains that would have come this way go another. Batteries that might have settled on these hills are counted instead behind fields with different names. The pressure does not vanish. It missteps. In the space of that misstep, the plateau finds its feet. The enemy tries Souville at night, with the economy learned from months of failure and some success. Assault groups slide to the lip and over. Flamethrowers cough along parapets. Grenades conduct short, curt conversations in the black. For a hanging moment, small knots reach the slope's crown and look south. It is said a man could see, through a seam in the smoke, the faint shape of a tower in Verdun, that he raised a hand as if to point out a sight to a friend, and in that gesture learned what a curtain of fire looks like when it drops exactly where it was meant to drop. The hill keeps its name. The men who reached too far return shorter by the length of those they leave. Fleury continues its argument with itself. In a cellar lit by a lamp no bigger than a fist, a sergeant writes, "Here," on a scrap, and pins it to a map, torn down to the square that matters. When he returns 3 hours later, he pins the scrap 2 houses away and does not change the word. Here is portable. Here is wherever somebody still says, "Hold the ditch until dawn." Here is a door that opens inward, a culvert that breathes cold air, a machine gun laid to rake a place where footsteps must pass. Here, today, is enough. In the rear, a different kind of thunder begins to sound, long-throw guns waking from their sidings. They speak rarely, but with a weight that travels through bedrock. Their shells go out like vows and return as new shapes on the horizon, chunks torn from the high fort that presides over everything like a guilty memory. Fire breeds silence in galleries men thought would never be quiet again. Deep in their concrete, stone giants remember that ownership is a temporary quality. The sky is busy with small profiles. 2-seaters circle slow, scribbling corrections. Fighters elbow them away or fail to, then try again. Balloons rise and fall as if breathing with the front. When the air clears for a minute, the plateau looks like a hand scarred by old work. Calluses where woods once stood. Knuckles where forts still crouch. new lines cut to make the grip surer. Men who have learned the palm by touch move along it without looking down. Souville is tried again, more briefly and with less hope. And again the ridge answers with the patient cruelty of angles. The enemy is left with a corridor that does not lengthen, and a collection of names that refuse to separate. The appetite that began the year as an idea has met a diet of stone and method, and the untidy mercy of distance. It is thinner now. It still bites, but its teeth slip. The sacred road does not care about ideas. It feeds. Day and night fold into each other along its edges, headlights hooded, hooves ringing, breath smoking into a coal that will be warm by noon, and hot by afternoon, and cold again by midnight. Drivers sleep with their heads against wheels while the convoy idles. Gendarmes drink something that keeps their eyes open and their hands precise. When a truck arrives with water forward of where water has any right to be, men lift the cans with the reverence they no longer waste on luck. By the time the heat turns the broken clay to a dull crust, the shape of the fight is plain even in haze. The high hinge above Verdun is still shut. The corridor is bent and watched. West of the river, the hills still answer. Behind them, the road still hums. Above them, the sky still circles. Before them, the guns still write. Losses are written in small, exact ledgers. Gains are written in verbs that do not boast. Anchor, align, deny, return. At dusk, a company coming off the line passes another going on. Eyes catch and hold for the length of a step. Mud recognizes itself on different boots. Someone lifts a canteen and tips it toward a stranger's mouth for a count of 3. No more, because everything here survives by measure. At the relief point, a pot of coffee lives at a simmer and never empties. A jam tin becomes a cup for the 5th time. A scrap of tobacco divides until it disappears into 5 sets of fingers. Night tucks in its elbows. The plateau breathes in a lower gear. In a trench named Yesterday and Forgotten Tomorrow, a runner repeats his sentence before stepping off. Hold to the ditch until morning, rake the slope, do not chase, and tucks the paper into his cap, because caps sometimes outlive men. In a gallery under Souville, a watch is wound and set beside a lamp trimmed low. The commander above checks the words painted on a board at the head of a dugout and finds them unchanged. He does not touch them. He does not need to. Somewhere beyond the river, a train's long note slides through the night like a promise. Somewhere above the plateau, an engine hums steady and then is gone. Somewhere on the ridge, a man listens to the ground and hears only the ordinary aches of earth cooling after a hard day. Between those sounds, the vow finds its breath again, not loud, not new, not triumphant. Just present, the way a heartbeat is present when the body has finally learned how to sleep even in a place that refuses the idea. Summer lays a hard glaze over the plateau. Heat slicks the broken clay until it shines dull as old pewter. The wind moves only enough to push smoke into new shapes. The ground that froze men in February now bakes them in July. Dust rises from every footfall, drifting into dugouts, settling on maps, turning water canteens into talismans. The river keeps its slow breath. The sacred road keeps its vow. The hills across the moors keep swallowing steel and giving time back. What Vaux taught in darkness, the ridge now applies in light. The corridor left by the fallen forts kinks and narrows under careful work, ditches deepened at night, wire sewn in crooked belts, firing lanes aligned until they interlock like clock teeth. On the slopes between Thiaumont, Fleury, and the high shoulder of Souville, patrols move the way a hand moves across a scar it knows by touch. A runner returns with the same sentence on his lips he carried out 2 nights ago, proof that the seam he was sent to test still holds. Fleury remains a verb. At noon it is theirs. At dusk it is argued. Before dawn it is reclaimed by those who have learned the alleys blindfolded. A doorway that faced east yesterday faces west today because a wall has fallen. A cellar that was a post becomes a trap, and then a hallway again. A private scratches today's date into mortar where last week's date already fades under spall. He underlines both because time here needs witnesses. Souville waits with a dry authority. Its angles are ugly on purpose, its doors low on purpose, its lungs smaller and therefore harder to choke. The ground before it is cut into overlapping questions, each answered by a field that crosses another field until any straight path turns into a test. Twice in the blue light before morning, assault groups reach the crown and look south through a seam in the smoke. Twice a curtain drops, exactly ranged, methodically cruel, and the ridge keeps its name. The men who saw too far return shorter by the length of those who did not. The sky learns new habits. Balloons rise in pairs like careful punctuation, and when the wind freshens, their cables sing softly. Two-seaters orbit, slow and stubborn, notebooks open on knees, lenses blinking at squares of ground that once were woods and are now pallets of shadow. Fighters shoulder them away and are shouldered in turn, the air a moving ceiling for the earth's long argument. Corrections drop down armored cables in clipped syllables. Left 30, lengthen 200, repeat for battery, and the map bends a fraction closer to the land. Across the Meuse, Morhomme and Côte 304 keep drinking steel so the right bank can breathe. Their forward faces are rubbed nearly flat. Defenders settle into reverse slopes and fire by timetable and faith. When the hammer falls harder there, the pressure here eases by the width of a breath. When the hammer turns back, the right bank tightens its grip by the same slim measure. The valley stays alive on 2 lungs, irregular, stubborn. The sacred road never asks for thanks. Lorries grind in an unbroken file, canvas bellies heavy with answers, shells, bread, wire, water, more shells. A truck stutters and hands appear. A wheel breaks and another cart noses in before the spokes stop bouncing. Light rails creep forward on nervous feet, wagons rattling with the rest of what the line requires. The smell along the verges becomes a signature. Hot oil, damp wool, cordite dust, wet rope, coffee that always tastes of smoke and still warms the hands. In the citadel beneath Verdun, command edits rather than proclaims. Schedules are refined until they feel like prayers said by heart. Divisions rotate before they fray. Rest is measured, not begged. Observers are paired to batteries and taught their squares the way a man learns the veins on the back of his hand. The sentence, written weeks ago, fire conquers, men hold, gains a second clause, and then we will move. It is not shouted. It is placed on a calendar. Somewhere beyond the valley, a new thunder begins to write its own story along a far front. Trains that might have come east are counted west. Batteries that might have found these hills take up other addresses. Reserves that would have pressed here are named on different orders of the day. The subtraction is not a miracle. It is a misstep. Inside that misstep, the ridge straightens its shoulders. Heat builds toward an afternoon that feels like glass. Gas searches the ravines with a chemic patience, a faint sweetness that teaches even the wind to be cautious. Masks go on, words shorten, breaths become seconds measured in cloth. Orders are delivered twice, slowly, so they will survive the pace air allows. When the cloud thins, rifles lift. When the cloud returns, eyes become clocks. In the trenches and works that lean toward Souville, a different rhythm takes hold. Practice by daylight, application by night. Men rehearse the walking of fire with sticks on a map chalked onto the ground. They learn to step under a barrage's moving roof with a punctuality that feels like superstition and is actually skill. Grenade teams drill not for glory, but for geometry. 3 arcs, 1 breath, shift, 2 arcs, another breath, hold. The wheel of relief turns without creaking. There is no single savior here, only endurance shared out in equal weights. Long-throw guns wake far back, low notes that travel through bedrock before the ear recognizes them. Their shells go out like measured oaths. When they arrive, they do not announce themselves with drama. They remove. A corner of the high fort that has dominated thought for months sloughs away. A turret that once rose and sank, like a breath, refuses to rise. Deep in the concrete, galleries remember that silence can be forced on stone. In the late days of August, rain breaks the heat for a day and then leaves everything heavier. Mud returns in a new key, warm, adhesive, scented with the sourness of scorched clay. The plateau sighs and sticks to boots. Letters arrive with corners softened by the season. Paper holds the shape of hands that needed it. A watch is wound beside a lamp, trimmed low. The tick is a kind of mercy. Fleury argues with itself again and again, but the arc of the argument is bending. Posts that used to last an hour last through noon. A lane held at dusk is still theirs at midnight. An alley that was a cut-through becomes a dead end by design. Here becomes a smaller square on the map, and the word begins to feel less like improvisation and more like claim. Orders gather into a single page, whose edges are thumbed smooth. Dumps are stacked along light rails under brown tarps, tied with careful knots. White tapes sleep roll quiet in rear saps, ready to unfurl and point in the dark. Range cards are updated. Passwords are chosen to fit in a dry mouth. Watches are synchronized in a small circle of hands. Steel catches the lamp, and then the lamp is hooded because excess light is waste. On an evening that smells of rain returning, a courier arrives with a message folded small as a coin. There's a time on it and a word that has not been spoken here for months, except in small rooms. Forward brigades study the verb the way a man studies a key, its teeth, its promise, the door it is meant to fit. Nobody smiles. Shoes are checked, straps replaced, pockets rebuttoned. Grenades are counted in quiet twos. Water is sipped, not drunk. A man who writes neatly copies the order into a notebook, and then copies it again on a scrap he tucks in his cap, because caps sometimes outlived notebooks. Across the Meuse, the hills feel the weight lighten by a notch, and answer with the exact measure of fire they can spare. In the town, the cathedral stones hold their breath a little longer between concussions. In the citadel, a pencil draws one more arrow than yesterday and stops, as if refusing the temptation to anticipate. Night comes down without breeze. Somewhere above the front an engine hums and then is gone. Somewhere far behind it, A train's long note slides through the dark like a metronome. The men who will step off lie down in their coats with boots on and rifles within reach. They sleep because sleep is a weapon. In the shallow quiet, someone counts the seconds between two distant guns and finds the interval steady. A sergeant repeats the sentence he will say at the tape. Forward to the line of white. Under the fire as it walks. Do not outrun it. Do not lag. And he hears his own voice belong to the ground. Toward morning, mist comes up from the ravines and the moors, as if the river means to lend its breath. The tapes wait under it like veins. The long throw guns take one final, patient breath. The barrage schedules sit folded in inner pockets, paper warm now from the men who carry them. Beyond the mist, the high shape that has ruled the year is less a crown than a silhouette missing pieces. No one invokes fate. They invoke method, maps, minutes, and each other. The vow that began as refusal becomes a hinge. Deny, then take back. Hold, then move. It is quieter than any speech, older than any order. It belongs equally to those who will step out under the walking roof of fire, and to those who will keep the road, the guns, the wards, the wires, the sky. The plateau inhales. A watch hand reaches the agreed place. Somewhere behind a low lip of earth, a whistle lifts and falls. The first line rises into the mist with the caution of craftsmen stepping onto scaffolding they built themselves. The road hums, the river breathes, the hills answer, the sky circles. The sentence that has carried them this far adjusts its tense without changing its heart. Mist lies low, a patient veil stretched from the moors to the raw ledges of the plateau. White tapes unroll under it like quiet veins. Watches click into agreement in small circles of hands. Orders are spoken once, then again slowly. To the line of white. Under the walking roof. Do not outrun it. Do not lag. When you stop, you dig. Boots shift. Straps are checked. Grenades counted in twos. There is no ceremony, only method. The first minutes belong to the guns. A curtain lifts from the horizon and begins to walk, steady as an old clock. It does not rush, it does not tire, it keeps time for those who will live beneath it. The air fills with a single determined note, high, constant, made from 1,000 separate thunders blurred into one. Under that shelter, men rise with the caution of craftsmen stepping onto scaffolding they built themselves. They go forward by sentence and by breath. WWII receives them like a familiar argument. At the tape, a sergeant names the alleys not by streets but by verbs. Hold here, turn there, hinge on that wall. A doorway that faced east last week faces west now. They treat it as a fact and go through. A cellar is cleared with short, exact violence. 3 arcs, 1 breath, shift, and then noted on a scrap with a single word, hours. Before noon, the scrap moves only once. By dusk, it does not move at all. Beyond WWII, the ground leans toward Tiamat and the scarred lip of the plateau. The walking fire climbs, pauses, lifts a measured distance, and the line climbs with it as if hauled by a soft, unseen rope. Machine guns rake angles that have been computed, rehearsed, believed. A section reaches a ditch, lays a belt of wire by touch, and lives to hide behind it. Another discovers a box of ammunition someone tucked under a board 2 nights ago and wrote down only in memory. Fate here still looks like workmanship. Across the river, Mort Homme and Côte. 304 answer with the stubborn rhythm of lungs that will not quit. When counter-battery fire hunts their positions, they sink into the earth and breathe on a schedule. When the hunting shifts away, they rise and speak again. Their insistence buys minutes on the right bank, and minutes here are currency. Above, the sky works like a sailing. Balloons hang back, patient punctuation. Two-seaters circle on notebooks and nerve. Fighters shoulder and are shouldered. The air a slow brawl that never quite falls into silence. Corrections come down the wires like pared-down prayers. Left 30, lengthen 200. Repeat for battery. After each correction, the land adjusts a fraction more toward obedience. On the sacred road, the file never breaks. Lorries grind and cough and keep moving. A wheel splinters and another cart noses in before the spokes stop bouncing. Hands appear from darkness to heave and coax without being asked. Light rails rattle forward under brown tarps tied with careful knots. The smell along the verges is now a signature. Hot oil, damp wool, cordite dust, wet rope, coffee that tastes of smoke and warms the hands anyway. The road counts in hours instead of miles, and wins by refusing to recognize the difference. Through late afternoon, the assault tightens into a posture. Shoulders angled toward the broad, wounded mass that has ruled thought for months. Far to the rear, the long-throw guns that wake like old animals speak in syllables that travel through bedrock. Their shells go out like measured oaths and return as absences. A corner sloughed, a casemate flayed open, a turret that once rose and sank, like a breath refusing to answer the lever. Smoke bleeds from seams that had loved silence. Evening finds Fleury less a verb than a place, garrisoned by habit. The line dresses on its left, corrects on its right, settles into the shape that the map already expected. In the faint cool, masks hang loose on the chests and are tightened again when a low cloud wanders the ravines with chemic patience. Orders shrink to fit dry mouths. Water is sipped, not drunk. A watch is wound because time must be made to behave. Before dawn, rain arrives, thin, warm, adhesive. The plateau exhales and sticks to boots. The barrage schedule sits in inner pockets, paper warmed through by the men who carry it. When the light strengthens, the curtain rises again, and with it the measured advance. Crest, pause, lengthen, follow. A culvert breathes cool air and becomes a hinge for the next step. A ravine that once was a place to hide becomes a lane to pass through. Geometry continues to have opinions. By late day, the shadow of the high fort looms not as a crown, but as a problem already half solved. Fire breeds emptiness in its galleries. The wet concrete steams. The smell is tar and hot iron and old air forced outside. Patrols go up the last approach, not as heroes but as surveyors, counting paces, touching stone. A door that resisted at noon yields at dusk with a tired hinge's sigh. Inside, heat clings to steel like memory. In a long room, a clock that no one owns anymore ticks on, indifferent. The ticking is quiet, almost embarrassed by how much work preceded it. A flare is sent up and smothers itself in rain. A replacement rises and hangs, pale as a throat. On a parapet, a hand goes up and stays there, not in triumph, but to call others into place. A runner who has carried the same sentence for weeks writes a new one on a scrap with a blunt pencil. Here, intact enough. Ours. He underlines the word and tucks the scrap in his cap, because caps sometimes outlive men. News folds across the valley like a soft sheet. In the citadel, backs straighten by the width of a vertebra and bend again to the ledger. Orders edit themselves once more. Consolidate. Rake the approaches. Anchor on Souville. Prepare the next page. Across the Meuse, the hills answer with a little more ease. On the road, the file does not shorten by a single truck. The sky clears by inches. In wide rooms of stone that were arguments for months, the air cools, and echoes return, boots, voices, the scrape of a tool against concrete. Men move through the fort they were told to take back and touch nothing they do not have to. A turret that will never rise again still obliges a hand across its cold skin. A lamp is trimmed lower, a watch is set beside it. Both survive the night. On the raw ground below, Fleury's dates over mortar stand in pairs, old and new, underlined by different hands. A platoon that learned the alleys by heart now learns the outfields by angle. A section lays wire by touch and lives to hide behind it. A battery fires the exact 3 minutes that closes a seam, then falls silent as if it had never existed. These are the shapes of return. Some of the weight lifts, not all, never all, but enough that breaths lengthen, and the map begins to look less like a wound and more like work to be finished. Souville's dry authority endures. The corridor remains kinked and watched. West of the river, the dark humps still drink steel and give time back. Above everything, the sky circles with the studied patience of those who have learned that victory can be an adverb, gradually, precisely, together. Night lowers its lid. In a trench that did not exist last week, a runner repeats his sentence before stepping off. Forward to the line of white, under the fire as it walks. Do not outrun it. Do not lag. When you stop, you dig. And tucks the paper where the pulse can feel it. In a gallery, under reclaimed stone, a commander writes a single line and closes his book. Hold what we took, ready for the next. The vow adjusts its tense without losing its heart. It is quieter now, rooted more deeply, spoken less and lived more, in schedules kept, in angles overlapped, in hands that lift, carry, relay, reload. The river breathes, the road hums, the hills answer. The fort that ruled the year no longer does. The sentence that began as refusal unfolds into motion. And this is how we take it back. Winter leans in from the edges. The heat that baked clay into a dull crust gives way to air that smells of iron and wet stone. Frost finds the lips of shell holes and rims them in white. Smoke hangs lower, heavier, as if the sky has learned the weight of what it watches. The river keeps breathing, slow and certain. The sacred road keeps its vow, lorries shouldering the cold, as if it were just another load to be moved from one hour to the next. Across the Meuse, the dark humps answer with a steadiness that no season can alter. The work is different now, cleaner lines, surer steps. The walking roof of fire has taught a cadence that feet remember even in mud stiffened by night. At Fleury, here is no longer a traveling word, but a place that holds across mornings. The alleys have been learned the way a craftsman learns the back of his hand. A door that opened inward yesterday opens inward today. A cellar that was a trap becomes a store for rations and wire. A private adds another date to the mortar, underlines all of them, and leaves them there like a small ledger no one will audit and everybody will honor. Beyond, the reclaimed height rules the thought that once ruled it. In long rooms of stone, echoes return. Boots, low voices, the scrape of a tool, the soft clink of a canteen set down with care. A turret that will never rise again gives up its cold to a hand that skims it as one might skim water, acknowledging presence without petition. The fort breathes ordinary air. The lamp is trimmed low, the watch beside it is wound, and left it to keep a human rhythm in rooms that forgot it for too long. On the right bank, Souville keeps its dry authority, less a threat than a promise fulfilled. The corridor below it is still kinked and watched, ditches mended, wire sewn, fields overlapped until any straight path turns into a test. Patrols move with surveyor's patience, pace, touch count, bringing back not trophies but certainties. A section lays a belt of wire by feel and lives to hide behind it. Another chalks a bearing in the dark on a scrap and hands it to the gun that needs only that, and faith to speak exactly. Far behind, deep-voiced pieces wake on their sidings and talk through bedrock to the high places that still pretend indifference. Their shells travel like long thoughts and return as absences, corners sloughed, galleries unroofed, steel cooled into shapes that admit how temporary ownership can be. You can smell it in the wind sometimes. Tar, hot iron, old air pushed out into winter. Stone remembers silence on command. The sky keeps its steady ceiling. Balloons rise and are drawn down in measured breath. Two-seaters circle with notebooks open, rewiring the land square by square. Fighters shoulder them away when they must and try again when they cannot. Corrections come down the armored lines in clipped syllables, left 30, lengthen 200, repeat for battery, and the ground obeys ever more quickly, as if eager for exactness. Across the river, Mort Homme and Côte, 304 keep swallowing steel so the right bank can make choices. Their forward faces are bald and bitten. The defenders lie on reverse slopes and fire by timetable and trust. When the hammer turns hard that way, here there is a breath to move a line forward by an orchard's width. When it turns back, the footholds are cinched until they feel like habit. The valley survives on two lungs, irregular, stubborn, sufficient. And the road, always the road. Headlamps hooded, radiators steaming, a whistle lifted and dropped by a gloved hand that has forgotten any other posture. Lorries grind and cough and keep moving. A wheel splinters. Another cart noses in before the spokes stop bouncing. Light rails rattle closer, brown tarps, tied with careful knots over shells and bread. The smell along the verges has become a certainty. Hot oil, damp wool, cordite dust, wet rope, and coffee that always tastes of smoke and still warms the hands. The road counts in kept promises. When the moment comes to test whether reclaimed ground will hold and give, it comes without flourish. White tapes sleep under frost. Watches click into agreement. Orders are spoken once, then again, slowly, to the line of white, under the walking roof. Do not outrun it. Do not lag. When you stop, you dig. Feet step off as if onto scaffolding built by the day before. The line goes forward in short, exact sentences. Hinge on that wall. Turn by that stump. Hold to that ditch until the hour, and not a breath more. West of the river, the hills answer with a protective rhythm that sounds like a metronome for courage. The names that had been arguments become statements, one by one. A spur is taken and kept until noon, then until night, then until nobody remembers a time it was otherwise. A wood that no longer deserves the word wood is given a grid reference and assured defense. A low, ugly work with a family name, one of those little redoubts that hold lines together, speaks by telephone to its neighbors until the line fails and then speaks by the fact of still being there. Along the front's mouth, the map begins to look less like a wound and more like work being finished properly. On a night made of breath steam and hoarfrost, Something quiet happens at the far lip of the effort begun in summer. The enemy's line, bruised and stubborn, leans back just enough to change how the ground feels underfoot. In the morning, patrols count paces in a place that used to be too exposed to count. A culvert that always breathed the wrong air breathes the right kind. Reports arrive with fewer commas and more periods. The ledger tilts. In the citadel beneath Verdun, backs straighten and bend again to the schedule. A pencil draws 2 arrows where yesterday there was 1, and then stops, as if refusing to tempt fate by drawing more than the day will bear. Orders edit themselves, consolidate, rake the approaches, adjust the wheel, make ready the page after this one. There are no speeches. There are tasks met and forwarded. The weather takes its tithe. Rain turns to sleet, and then to a fine snow that powders wire and settles into the seams of greatcoats. Boots pick up weight and put it down. In forward places, men drink heat from enamel mugs, count socks like silver, fold letters that smell faintly of soap and damp wool, and carry them as extra armor. A watch is wound and set beside a lamp with its wick trimmed small. Time behaves, which is all anyone has asked of it for months. Then, as the year draws in upon itself, the plateau changes voice. The heavy thrum that has lived under every hour lifts by degrees, as if a pressure in the valley had been relieved somewhere beyond it. The far guns that fed this fight in winter and summer and heat and rain have other names to answer now. The line here is no less vigilant, no less exact. But daylight begins to include moments when the wind is audible again, not just the sky and the earth arguing in iron. Somewhere on the reclaimed height, a company stands in a room of stone and listens to ordinary echoes. Someone strikes a match, cups it, lights a lamp. Someone writes a single date on a wall that already holds a small calendar in graphite and chalk. Someone else walks the length of a corridor and counts the doors, because counting is a habit that has saved lives, and finds that the number today is the number it should be. Outside, along the lip that looks toward the town, the air is cold and clean enough to sting. If you lift your eyes, you can make out a spire through the seam in the winter light. Across the moors, the hills sit black and patient, their silhouettes honest about what they have paid and what they have given back. The sacred road hums with less urgency and the same devotion. Gendarmes lower their arms and lift them again, as if refusing to unlearn the gesture in case it is needed tomorrow. The sky sheds a little of its busyness and becomes weather again. What began as a sentence of refusal lives now as a way of doing things. Angles overlapped, schedules kept, burdens shared until they resemble luck. It inhabits hands that lift and carry and relay and reload. It lives in the slow, exact articulation of orders that waste no breath. It sits in the quiet between concussions when a man decides to take one more step forward and then does. It is not loud. It is durable. Evening comes early. In a trench that did not exist in spring and will have a different name next week, a runner repeats his sentence before stepping off. Hold to the ditch until morning. Rake the slope. Do not chase. And tucks the paper where the pulse can feel it. In a gallery under reclaimed stone, a commander closes a small book and puts the pencil beside it, pared to the bone and still useful. Outside, frost takes the wire and makes it glitter like something newly promised. The river breathes, the road hums, the hills answer, The heights that ruled the year no longer do. Men lie down with boots on, and rifles within reach, and, for the first time in a long time, sleep stretches past a handful of breaths. Somewhere a clock ticks in a room where nobody raises a voice. The vow adjusts its tense one last time, not to erase what was paid, but to honor what was kept. They did not pass. And because of that, when it was time, we went forward, and the valley learned how to be quiet again.